All right, well, welcome to Garden of the Woods, and thank you for joining me today. We're going to do a quick little demonstration today about transplanting a Trillium. And we have a really beautiful Trillium cuneatum specimen here that we're going to dig up. We're going to take a little look at the rhizome and talk a little bit about how you might want to vegetatively propagate it, and then we'll talk a little bit how to transplant it properly. So, first step is when you get ready to transplant, you really want to move away any of the leaves and so forth so you can actually really see where the plant is emerging out of the ground. And then with your implement of choice, I like a soil knife, but you can also use a small spade or a small trowel. You begin very carefully digging around, not right next to the stem, but a little bit away from it, and understanding that the rhizome itself can be anywhere between 4 to 6 inches below the ground. So you really want to be careful about not jamming into it as you begin to excavate out the soil around it. I tend to like to use my hands a little bit more so that I can actually see what I'm doing and also feel where the rhizome might be and in which direction it might be going. And so this step does take a little bit of a careful and delicate touch, but once you get underneath the rhizome, then you can begin to carefully pry it out. Again, I like to use my fingers because I can feel where the rhizome is, and you can carefully tease it out. And so here it is. All right, and I have a handy little bucket of water here, so I'm going to dunk it in just to wash off a little bit of the soil so that we can actually see what's going on underneath. A little bit closer. So the rhizome here is actually a piece of stem tissue, and the plant makes roots that emerge out of the stems. The plant also makes what are called contractile roots, and so these roots, the ones that are emerging a little bit later, further back on the rhizome, are older roots that serve the process of pulling the rhizome a little bit deeper into the soil. Every year, the plant will make a new bud at one end, which is called the terminal bud, and it leaves a scar or a ring where it was in previous years. And so you can actually get a rough estimate of how old this plant is by counting the number of rings that you see on the rhizome. And so this one, if I just wash it off a little bit more, I can take a rough estimate and say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. This humble little Trillium is probably 22 years old, which is pretty amazing to think that it takes 22 years to get to something this size. But it's also a good lesson in why Trilliums grow slowly, why they're so hard to grow in nursery trade, and why they're such cherished members of our woodland flora. So, because this is stem tissue, there also are dormant buds that are buried into the old rings here, and so you can propagate this by chopping the rhizome into smaller pieces. You don't want to go too small, and it's good if you can leave some pieces of root in place. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this in half, and so we'll have 2 Trilliums instead of 1. And this is a good way to vegetatively propagate these. And so I'm going to make a cut right about here in the middle. It's always good to have good sharp pruners. And we're going to make one cut, just like that. And there you have it. And so this piece can be replanted, and it'll sit, it won't grow anything this year, but it'll callus over and new buds will form on the top, and it'll start to make smaller Trilliums by next year. And then eventually in 3 to 5 years you'll have a somewhat bigger plant. This one is ready to be transplanted to another location. If you're transplanting lots of Trilliums, I do like to have a bucket of water so that you can keep the plant inside the bucket of water until you carry it over to the new location. You can see that it, having been out of the ground just even for the few minutes that I've been speaking to you, has caused the edges of the leaves to curl a little bit, which is a little bit of a drought stress. And so keeping them really well hydrated inside a bucket of water is a great way to make sure that you reduce water stress during transplants. So the last tip that I'll give you about replanting has to do with the color of the stem. If you don't remember exactly how deep the rhizome was when you dug it up, a good gauge is to know that the leaf litter should start right where the stem begins to color nice and dark red here. And that if you're planting it and there's this white section of the stems peeking up out of the ground, you haven't put it in deep enough. All right? And so we're just going to replant this one here just to go over the same process again. You make sure the hole is good and deep. You set it in the ground, all right about the right level. And you pack the soil in nicely, firmly. Make sure there's good soil and rhizome contact. And you follow it up by dressing it with some leaves or some mulch, whatever your choice may be. And there you are, and it's good to go. So that's just a little quick lesson on transplanting and dividing trilliums. Thank you for joining me.